Hi everyone, and welcome again to my audiovisual channel. My name is Gabriela Handal, and I'm a draftsman and also the host of the show A Conversation About Art. During each episode, I look for the meaning of art and beauty through conversations with colleagues in different artistic fields. Today, I offer you episode 79, and I will talk with artist Simon Renshaw. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so by liking and sharing this video and also by subscribing to my audiovisual channel. These are all immediate and at no additional cost to you. If you'd like to show your support with money, it's also very welcome and appreciated. You can do so by purchasing my drawings directly from my website, which is just gabrielahandal.com, one word. You can purchase crafts I make from eBay, you can buy prints of my drawings, or you can leave me a tip. The links for all these things will be in the caption. Thank you for your time and attention in watching this episode, and do leave a comment so I know you were here. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, Simon Renshaw, welcome to my podcast, A Conversation About Art. You are episode 79. Please tell our viewers and listeners who you are and what you do.
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me as a guest on your podcast. My name's Simon. I have a Instagram account and YouTube channel under the name Simon Says _artwork. I mostly these days interview artists more so than make artwork myself, but I do make video artwork as well as 2D drawn and painted work. And yeah, it's in several genres, I must confess. It's not one singular focus. Mm-hmm. So I create work which could be considered in a illustrative comic book genre. And then I do more, more drawn fine art, academic drawing, and then plein air painting and several other disciplines. I'm doing a more contemporary fine arts project at the moment. So trying to spread myself as thin as possible to have the most creative outlet.
Mm-hmm. Why do you want to have so many creative outlets instead of focusing on one thing?
Well, I used to, before I made art, I used to make music, which is something I'm still doing as well, I forgot to mention. And I feel as though if I were to focus solely on, say, academic drawing, I feel as though there'd be part of my creative expression which wouldn't be exercised. There's parts of me that wants to do, say, still life drawings like those there, which are behind me, and then another part of me that wants to do mutation things which are just straight from my imagination and a bit more unwieldy. And then plein air is something which I'm trying to learn, plein air painting, which is difficult. Obviously, it takes a long time to master, but something which I'm determined to understand better and to have a body of work. And I feel as though the more I can try to hone these skills, the more they may complement each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, it's I suppose it's not, I suppose it's common for one individual to have to like express themselves in more than one artistic medium. And when you started, it's like almost immediately after I asked you just now, it's like, why do you want to do so many stuff? I remembered that indeed I have asked several of my previous guests, just whichever one that had more than one artistic medium. And I do that myself, of course, but it's kind of because I feel like there's something that I can't say with one medium or something that I can't explore with one medium. So then I try to do it in another medium. So my main medium is drawing, but then if I feel like reusing or, upcycling, as they call it lately, materials like jar lids of peanut butter and this type of stuff into something, then I obviously can't, I can only do so much with drawing in that case. So for example, So then I would like to know, what are you trying to say with the different mediums of expression? What are you trying to say with music that you can't say with visual art? Yes, tell me that.
It's interesting. I'm not sure what it is that I'm actually trying to express really with these things. I know that the current project I'm working on is a collaborative project. So it's part of a kind of a shared interest that I have with another artist in old farming machinery, and then the industry of farming and the culture around the people who farmers. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've been learning, but we're trying to find out the boundaries of that project so that it doesn't continue to expand beyond the scope of what the exhibition is trying to deliver. And it's a hard thing to intuit, really. You just have to push until you meet that boundary. Whereas what I'm trying to express with plein air, it's curious because I'm not going for a real, I have one here actually, it's not the best. I mean, it's only because it relates to the farming, but I'm just trying to get a tertiary coverage of what I'm looking at. And I'm trying to understand that palette of really lighter tones so that I'm not doing colors that are so bright. Because I have done paintings before where I haven't mixed the paint down enough. A lot of it is more of a curiosity of my own of how the medium actually works and what I see in, why is it I've stopped in this position to paint this view? Is it the classic landscape, or is there something specific which has captured my imagination? Ordinarily, I don't question that too deeply. I just trust that there's something here that I need to admire and try to render. Now, this gets a bit more difficult when it comes to the comic book like drawings, because there I think it might harken back to my love of a Japanese animation film called Akira. And in that film, there's a mutation scene towards the end. And that's always been something that I really enjoyed, because it was the figurative characters then, started to become more abstract and could just balloon into anything. There could be kind of, all types of things shooting out. And I think that a lot of my mutations are inspired by that. And my admiration for that film is based on how well understood the real world and light works. So I think surely I'm just inspired more by the greats of the past that have influenced my work, I think.
Mm-hmm. I guess you haven't strictly mentioned this, but it made me think of something I've heard, not sure from who, but it has something to do with being very familiar with drawing the figure from life and drawing landscape, just from life in general, both landscape and the figure, and being so familiar with both that then you're able to manipulate them both from imagination. You're able to draw both of them and manipulate them from imagination. So the hypothesis is that if you draw the figure from life enough and you remember and study that information enough, both, not just the figure or landscape, animals as well, for example, because especially with what you were saying about mutation. Also, if you like study all vertebrates, for example, because the skeleton is so similar between all of them, it's like you're going to end up making some chimera, some super cool chimera thing, mutant chimera thing. And it's probably easier when you can see how one would morph from one to the other or something. And I mean, it does. And then after that, it's like once you're able to maybe kind of imagine that and then maybe make studies of that, then you're probably able to kind of break out of those bounds of reality in a way, when you're kind of like quote unquote limited by the animals that you already know, and you're kind of able to derive further animals that don't exist, but they're derived from the ones that do exist. You know what I'm saying? Would you say there's something of that in your search?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely agree. I think, I'm not sure if you know the artist Marshall Vandroff. Do you know him? No.
No.
He's I think it was him. It's one of three people who said this. It was either Marshall Vandroff, Aaron Blaise, or James Gurney. One of the three, but I'm confident it was Marshall Vandroff, who said that if you learn human anatomy, you can identify it in other vertebrates because those proportions just shift, you know, and if you move the heel and the ankle to certain areas, you can see it's in other animals, which I thought was fascinating, and I haven't learned to that extent. But I definitely agree with what you said about drawing from imagination beyond, you know, having to rely on a reference or in-person subjects. That's reinforced by my appreciation and admiration for the recently late Kim Jung-yi. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was a big influence, and I met him once, and he kicked a lot of people into that influence of drawing from imagination as accurately as possible and trying to get proportion and perspective well observed and understood without having to rely on a reference, which I've always tried to pride myself on, but then you find how far that can go and how much of a gap there is between what you're trying to achieve and what is actually possible without greater span of knowledge. So yeah, I think that's, and a chap called Jeff Watts once said that when you're an artist, measuring is something that you do, but the ideal is to have it ingrained so that your eye is trained to understand measurements beyond relying on, you know, using the pencil to measure. And Jeff Watts is a fantastic draftsman who really understands anatomy. So when I saw that, I understood that that's something which I've definitely tried to embody before I even came across him sharing that ideal. But I agreed that that's something which I'd like to have, is something where my brain and my eyes at least. Again, I hate to keep referring to other artists, but I interviewed a chap called Paul Heaston, and he said that when he draws, his hand and his eye can render accurately, but his brain gets in the way. And he said that when he's drawing, his brain tells him this is this big, but if he ignores it, his brain and his eye and his hand can render more accurately, as in he's seeing something and he's trying to draw it, but his brain is tricking him to think that foreshortening is twice as wide as it actually is. And he says that you need to usually half the amount of foreshortening and double how dark you go in shadow areas because of how much your brain tricks you on those types of observations. So anyway, yeah, so things like that I absolutely try to have ingrained in my practice.
Okay, so I'd like to know, well, I guess, how long have you been kind of like dipping your toes in all of these different pools of different expression?
Well, music I started making when I was about 18, and it was hip hop. That's what I'd make. I'd first be a lyricist, and then I started doing MIDI production when I was early 20s. I think I may have been 20. Whereas drawing and painting, I haven't done for the majority of my life, and I only started in 2014, I think it was, when I had just a big life change, really. And I couldn't keep a job due to illness. I kept losing jobs, and then when I was forced to kind of reevaluate everything, I suppose, that's when I had a conversation with my older brother, who is an artist and always has been. And he told me that he works with people who aren't quite as skilled in certain areas as he believes that I am. And he said, you could make money well enough being a mural artist or whatever you want to do. So I started working freelance for a while. And so it's about 2014 is when I started doing it. But I'm still learning the lessons of discipline and regular practice in order to earn money, keep accounting, and, you know, make it an actual business as opposed to just a hobby, because I really need this to become, you know, a sole source of income, really, because I can't hold down another job, you know, due to illness. And you do feel sometimes boxed in by your own personality. Of artists only work in their own passionate field sometimes, I think, and that's something which I think I struggle with. So yeah, it's been about, is that about 8 years? I think it is. 9 years. Yeah.
Okay. Is the illness the stomach thing or the digestive system thing you told me about?
It is, yeah. It started with celiac disease, and then I've had illnesses all my life, but not stomach illnesses. But that was just, you know, almost did me in. That one, you know, almost took me out, because it was something which is hard to treat. People don't take it as seriously because they can't see it in you, and you just lose weight rapidly, and your whole body reacts in different ways, and you can suffer from stress and depression, and that changes your behavior, and all types of unhealthy patterns become a domino effect, really. So yeah, that's what it was.
Okay. But okay, so then why did you end up doing something that is arguably really difficult, which is art, as your I don't know, you know, what you chose to, I mean, that which you chose to, you know, make your income independently, when it could have been, I don't know, I don't know. I mean, I don't have really that much imagination for that stuff, but just like any kind of other business venture, I guess, entrepreneur, you know, individual entrepreneurship, I suppose, could have been. Why did you end up specifically with art? Was it because your brother was already doing it, and you kind of have like, he kind of has like a roadmap in a way already? If he has like kind of more, I mean, you know, why did you end up doing that?
Actually, I mean, the reason I think I didn't make art all my life is because I assumed that was my brother's field. I think I should have not let that influence my decisions, really, and let us both venture off into the art world separately, or kind of, you know, parallel, however we would.
Yeah.
But I think that was something which made me feel insecure at a young age. And
is he older than you?
He is, yeah. He's 6 years older than me, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's predominantly a mural artist, but he does illustration work as well, and graphic design. He's very, very highly skilled. He always has been especially good. And I showed talent at a young age, but not to my brother's extent. And I think that maybe made me concerned that there'd be a comparison, you know, at a young age. And something happened in high school where there was one other person in high school who was good at drawing, and that would be a competition in my head. And it really, you know, was an unhealthy thing to try and reconcile. The reason why I picked artwork is because it felt natural to me. I know that I enjoy drawing and that I don't mind hard work. The stress of not making money is something which I'm not really good with money anyway. When my job before I started making artwork was probably the most I've ever been paid, but it was the most stressful work. It was 12-hour shifts with an unpleasant group of people, and it was doing just constant computer work and calling people on the phone who'd be abusive.
A call center job?
It was, but it was for a security company. So you weren't cold calling people. You were calling them about security events.
Yeah.
But it'd be calling celebrities or big businesses. It was really, you know, high stake stuff, you know. But the people that I'd work with, you know, my supervisor would be so unprofessional that my boss, the very, you know, top boss of the company, would use my calls as training for new employees and not the supervisor, you know. So it was all a difficult thing to try to get comfortable in. And those work environments can be tricky. I'm not good at taking orders. I don't like the attitude of, I've worked in several supermarkets, and I hate someone coming up and going, this, please, this, you know. I can't have someone talk to me like that. I would rather lose my job for something unacceptable than then allow that to happen. So artwork just became a natural transition for me, because I suppose I just didn't think of any other way. If music were an easy way to make money, which it certainly, as far as I understand, isn't, I would have made music, because I'm quite happy composing, jingles or whatever it is in music. But because I do a bit of both now, I think I enjoy it. It's just trying to make ends meet when it comes to these different avenues of creativity.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, so how would you say that, now that you've been exploring all of these different ways of talking, in quotes, how would you say that they inform each other? Because,
Well,
for example, the project that you're working on with the farm thing and the plein air, for example, because you mentioned that when you were showing the painting, there's overlap there, because it's like that field probably cows graze on it or something. So it's like a study of the environment of the cows, for it, something like that, and it's further informative. But how would you say, how have you noticed that the different means of expression inform each other?
it's from the plein air to the contemporary art it's different. I mean, I'm considering using that painting, but I have to change it in order for it to be contemporary, because that's more a impressionistic classical approach to painting. And it's interesting, because the contemporary art is the most challenging at the moment. It's trying to make 2D art 3D without sculpture. So, for example, I'm now drawing on large sheets of paper in order to be curled over something on the floor, because I'm trying to make a landscape that's drawn and giving some kind of messaging, but also wrapping it around something to make it contemporary. It's trying to use the way we exhibit the work, communicate beyond the work itself, so that it can't be framed and sold in a gallery. It has to be tailored towards exhibitions. It's very challenging because it's not natural for me. Whereas ordinarily what I mean is that when I start doing ink drawings, just ink first, they're immediately tonal.
Mm-hmm.
So they help inform the plein air, because I understand tonal values to an extent, and then trying to work sensitive midtones is a lot of communicating in British light, because we don't have great strong light like you have in different countries, where you'll have this lovely afternoon light, and in the UK it can be very flat and hard to get decent shadows, and it's all about light and shadow. So you either emphasize things or you paint at a specific time. Whereas if you can create something yourself with your own lights, you can create that type of drama and that lighting effect. But otherwise, the way that they influence each other, I suppose, is that the better I get at any of the practices, the better I can obscure them in the contemporary art, because I can draw something fairly quickly now and then add some tone with charcoal, then add water and make a mess out of it, and then tidy it up again and then make a mess out of it. And then that's usually the process for my contemporary practice, is abstraction, kind of almost forced abstraction, to try to ensure that people can find several interpretations beyond anything that I could conceive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's quite removed from how they normally speak to each other. And music, to be honest, it's like I usually make music based on the person I've interviewed. So when I interviewed you, I made music based on who I thought you were and who your artwork was.
Mm-hmm.
So there was kind of this initial kind of deep tones and kind of bass tones and, drums that were kind of, almost soundtrack like, because some of your work can look really quite dark and really, really cool, kind of almost kind of dark fantasy or folk kind of images.
Mm-hmm.
And then going into the more, I don't know, just incredibly well rendered pieces and just beautiful angelic looking figures. and that's where there could be a break in the song, you know, and that's where the timing can work. I don't know if this is answering you well enough to sort of say how they communicate with each other, you know.
It is, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Yeah, and I particularly like this last part about the music and making music after you talk to someone. Because there's definitely something to be said about the way that certain sounds feel. There's I mean, do you know the artist Kandinsky?
Yes.
I mean, I haven't read any of the essays that I'm going to talk about, but I know that he wrote essays about the overlap, not necessarily the overlap, but the strong parallels that there are between visual art and oral art, or, you know, auditive work, music. And I think that's really cool because indeed, when you listen to music, you feel things, and it can influence your mood. It can make you, or at least it definitely happens to me that I want to like either dance or like I want to move around. So it's like if I'm drawing and I want to listen to music, it's usually a mistake if I do listen to music because I'm like dancing and stuff, and it's like I can't draw very well if I'm dancing, obviously, right? So then it's like this issue, and I'm like, yeah, but I want to enjoy the music and stuff, you know. You know, it's kind of funny. And like the other thing is how, for example, if you're talking either about color or tone, you have like a tone or a color, and if you put another tone or color next to it, then it kind of changes the way, you know, the way they look changes a little bit when they're both present. So like that also applies to music, to like two sounds. So it's like you have a sound and then you put it next to another sound, or like immediately after another sound, or like you make them sound at the same time together. And so like that changes the way that they sound. And so like that is analogous to, you know, they're analogous to each other. And those are the only parallels that I can think of at the moment, but those are two of many, I'm sure, of their relationship, of how they relate to each other, how they're similar, which is really quite cool. I haven't looked at these, I haven't read these essays, but I'm aware that Kandinsky wrote essays about the parallels between visual art and music, which seems cool.
Can I just say as well, when you talk about music and drawing, I once had someone who I refer to as my art mentor. She prefers I just call her my friend, which she is, and but she's taught me a lot. And I sat drawing a model at her house once, who was sat there in a, you know, sun hat. It was, we were drawing away, and it was, I think it was some kind of folk music that was playing, and then it changed for, it was either Iron Maiden or something a lot more heavy, and you could hear our mark making change, you know, from kind of doing conservatives, you know, really kind of moving with the rhythm of the music. And we didn't acknowledge it until after the session. You know, it was something which we retrospectively, you know, reflected upon, as opposed to in the moment noticed, because we were too focused on achieving something worthwhile in the moment, and honoring the model, who would obviously look at the work as soon as we're finished. But it did pop into my head, because that is difficult, listening to music and not have that inform your mark making as it plays.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I remember when I was an undergrad, the teacher was like, yeah, we're going to listen to music and you're going to paint what you listen, what you hear, or whatever. And there was this whole thing about how music influences your mood. And even though I just said it does, I really hated the idea of something outside of me controlling my mood. And I was like, no, because I choose the music that I'm going to listen to, you know, because, you know, in that sense, I am in control of it. So if I feel cheerful, then I'm going to listen to something cheerful, you know, like I'm going to choose the cheerful music to listen to. But okay, that's a little bit tangential. Okay. All right. So Mr. Renshaw, what is art in your opinion?
You know, I've thought about this because I knew that you asked this question, and I don't have an immediate answer, because I'm someone who, I may have expressed this to you before, someone who struggled with the philosophy of my school when I went there. The art school I went to was big into Dadaism, and they'd push that practice as the, pinnacle of art practice, and the tutor would, waltz around all of the students and say, so and so said painting is dead, and then he'd just move on to something else, and it just really made me kind of clench and tighten up and go, and can you expand upon that, or resolve that statement? So I struggled there, but at the same time I tried to reserve certainty for something which I feel very, very knowledgeable about, and that's very few things. So when it comes to art, for example, I've expressed to you how much I relate about what I feel about ready-mades. That was something I was confronted with in university, because I would express this dissatisfaction with how much they can do for art, and then that was just met with, you haven't read enough about it. So I'd read more about it and find that there wasn't, there was a great appreciation out there and a great history of people who honored and respected that movement, and that led to another movement and other artists. Obviously, everything is preceding everything else. So I understand that, but it still seems as though it was a snapshot of time where it's had its moment, and it's not really anything which is still creating interesting ideas now. Mm-hmm. That being said, if I were to see a urinal on the street and there was no Duchamp, if that never existed, and I saw it tipped up, I'd probably say, I could draw that. It'd probably be a shape that I'd say, that could go into one of my doodles, as some kind of form, either a spaceship or a character or something. So I can see the appreciation of shape design. It's more the messaging and ideology and political significance that I think rubs me the wrong way. Mm-hmm. But the same with the stool and the wheel, embedded in it. If that happened in a tornado, I would definitely photograph it and say, this is art. But when someone says this is art, I say, is it? It's weird. It's kind of almost the presentation. Again, I'm not answering your question directly, but if you'll bear with me, I'll try to.
Yeah, I'll bear with you.
Explain. There was one tutor who I really liked in university. There was two, but one left immediately. So there was one who remained in university. He was a painting tutor. And he didn't paint my type of paintings, but I really liked his work anyway, and he was a very nice man. He said, does anyone think there's such a thing as bad art? And I was the only one to put my hand up. Nobody else thought there was such a thing as bad art. And he thought it was hilarious. He said, oh, you think there's such a thing as bad art, do you? Do tell. I said, well, I'll give you my Instagram account so you can have a look. There's lots of bad art on my Instagram account, because I just post whatever I make, and I'm trying to make good art, but not everything can qualify as good art. Some things just fall short. And to try and expand on that, I said, I'm trying to get some kind of accuracy with the human form, and I fall short. I kind of have things which are poorly observed and not very well rendered. That can't achieve a level of good art in that genre. And if I describe myself as someone who's a photorealist, which I don't, but if I did, and I didn't achieve that, it would become either bad art, or it would fall into some other genre of art, which is, I don't know. But I think that we need to accept that not all art is good or equal. This shouldn't seem controversial, but I still have this weird voice in my head from university of, what do you mean? Justify your statement. And I just think, isn't this obvious that, there is art which is not, I heard about some art in university that I think should be really heavily criticized, really unethical art and just poor taste, and things which I really wish that fine art was elevated beyond. And I try to be as open-minded as possible. So I try to encompass all kinds of art practices that I would never consider. There was an artist who, I should have her name, but because I even wrote about her in my dissertation. I can't remember her name. I'll tell you afterwards. Her artwork was having surgery on herself in front of an audience, and that was her art. that was very hard for me to digest, but I encompassed it in my dissertation. It was about originality, because I was trying to appeal towards how originality isn't the most important thing in art, because being original can lead to all types of ideas that are just trying to be different and trying to be unique and not actually striving for greatness, which I feel as though that should be somewhere in most artists' mind or heart, is to try and achieve something which elevates the practice and, you know, instills pride in people who are the viewers of this art. So, long answer, I apologize. What is art? I think that it could be argued that a lot of things are art, but that is an ever expanding. For example, sorry, I'm digressing again, but someone once said to me, performance isn't art. And I don't know if that's true, but I didn't say to them that's not true, because I don't know. I'm kind of open to all of these suggestions. I've watched performance art and I thought it's performance art, but is it fine art? You know, because it gets labeled fine art and that feels strange to me. And I've had people say to me, Rembrandt and Da Vinci aren't fine art, they're illustration, which annoyed me because I just thought this is unreasonable at this point. But there we are. So I struggle to know. I must admit my answer at the moment would be I don't know, but I'm certainly disapproving of a lot of art practices, and not all art, in my opinion, is equal.
Well, I thoroughly agree with you, and you're singing to the choir. This last part of knowing what isn't is still important. I listened to a YouTube thing about the art business, and it's like, even if you can't pinpoint who like your ideal customer is, knowing who your customers are not is still really important. It's like that's still a way to kind of shave down the path to who your customers are. You still want to know who your customers aren't to know who to not invest time with, you know, with whom to not invest time. And yeah, I mean, I've definitely had at least a handful of people, and I mean, I know of the whole thing about, yeah, anything can be art or whatever. And I myself, I mean, you know, if you've listened to whichever episode of the podcast of, I mean, this is something that I've talked about it, and how I mean, my answer to what is art is for now probably very similar to what you just said. It's like, no, I don't know what it is. But I'm getting comfortable with, or like giving myself permission to discern and just be like, no, that is not art. You know, like in the case, for example, of installation or performance happenings, like this type of stuff, or like things that all they're doing is just like imitating what Duchamp did with the ready-made, because it's like everything that came after that is just imitating what he did. It's just they're trying, not even necessarily imitating, trying to reproduce the feeling or the shock or the impression or the like, oh my God, the, you know, whatever that he did at the time. And it's like, that is obviously physically impossible, because that's just not going to happen again. Because like that moment happened then, and then that's it. But I feel as though, or I have the impression as though, even if we, you know, humans, even if we've tried to mock or belittle or reimagine, in quotes, as the term that we love to use these days, reimagine this and reimagine that, as much as we try to do that with art, we still know that it's an important thing that is valuable and meaningful. And that's why we try to ascribe it to things that don't deserve the term, like performance, like happenings, because it's like, okay, so performance, as far as I understand, it's like you're kind of acting something out. So it's like, you should probably try actual acting instead of trying to do some kind of hybrid between acting and art. It's like maybe you failed as an actor and maybe you failed as an artist. So it's like, I'm going to just be a performance artist and do this stuff in a gallery and I want people to watch me doing it. You know, I don't know. I just feel like a lot of the things which get labeled art, whether by a gallery or the alleged artist themselves, are things that were not criticized enough in order to be kind of tempered into something good. And, you know, with the term criticism, I have like a whole blog entry about critiques, because like in arts, I don't know if it happened with you in art school, the term in art school that is used is critique, because I guess criticism sounds like so negative, but a criticism of something, and you know, if you look up the definition of the term, it means to analyze something. So you're not like shitting on the thing. You're looking at both you're just like analyzing it in, I mean, one is looking at the purpose of a criticism. So like an analysis involves looking at the positive things and at the negative things, what can be improved, and just kind of like thinking about whatever it is that you're criticizing. So if a person has a project which they want to call art, but it's bad, then it has to be criticized in the sense that it has to be analyzed so that it can then be polished to become actual good art. Because I also completely agree with you that of course there's bad art and of course there's good art. There has to be a discernment, because then there wouldn't be such a thing as art that has been able to come down to us centuries and even millennia after they were made and still blow our modern minds.
Yeah, there'd be no masters.
Yeah, exactly. There wouldn't be any masters, and whatever it is that they did would not matter if it wasn't good. So there's actually an episode where my guest used comparison with food. So of course it's like, obviously there's bad food. So then obviously there's also good food. Yeah. You know, but then that also means that there are things which are not food. Yeah. You know, and he didn't mention the part about there not being food, because I thought about that afterwards, and I was like, that's actually a really good comparison, because it's like there's things that you clearly cannot eat, because and that is applicable to everything. There's things that are better than others within a category of something, but then the things that are out of the category and are not in that category are not that. Yeah.
Cyanide is bad food.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, yeah, I mean, so then it's like, where is the line between the bad art and something ceasing to be art? I don't know. It's like, that is another thing, but that might be another thing. That might be like another podcast on its own. But, you know, of course there's bad art. And then there's also stuff that does not deserve to be called art. It does not, not just because it's so bad, but because it's just another category of something.
There's certain things which I would say, I mean, I'll send you links after we've got the recording, which one artist, I mean, I shouldn't call them an artist, one person who submitted this as art, their thing was to go to graves, take the objects which people would leave to their loved one and exhibit them in a collection, which I just think is so unethical and such poor taste. Isn't that grave
robbing?
Yeah, which it should be just dismissed.
It's like, that sounds illegal.
Yeah. But it was again presented as, I mean, there was things which were worse than that, but that was one which stuck in my head as, why are we being taught this? Why are we being presented this? But I mean, I was, you know, presented a fine arts degree by a gaggle of incompetence. I mean, the idea of critique in my university wasn't honoured, because my understanding is that one of the students shows their work, the other students critique it, and the tutor then assesses the students' critiquing for their ability to analyse and criticise aspects of the work, whereas the students instead would ask questions of the person whose work it was, and they wouldn't know enough in order to answer. They'd just be defensive, and the students who asked the question wouldn't know enough about, you know, how to read artwork and how to assess. You know, there was lots of things that were just huge gaps in people's knowledge. And I would talk to the tutors about this, and I'd recorded the sessions, because I started recording calls with the tutors because I was concerned about what the direction things were going. So I started to secretly record conversations as evidence, because I thought I'd heard enough bad responses from tutors that I thought this needs reporting, which I ended up doing. But yeah, some of their approach to students who reached out, again, if you'll forgive me, I'll give one example where a young woman said, I'm trying to draw this chair, but I'm struggling. It's a chair with a back, no arms, seat. I'm struggling to draw this chair. And the tutor said, well, sometimes when you can't draw things correctly, they can look quite good. Do you know what I mean? And that was his response to her, was kind of, you can be the girl who doesn't draw very well. And I thought all he would have had to say is, I will give you links to how to do perspective, and I'll direct you towards someone who can help you with how to understand different perspectives of objects like that and still life studies. Because it was just a chair with a back, and I ended up drawing a chair with a back on it several times afterwards, just because I couldn't get it out of my mind what had happened in that meeting. And this was all over Zoom, because I did this during the pandemic. So I have the meetings recorded anyway, because they were over Zoom that you could download. But it was quite common to hear tutors pass off legitimate concerns from students in order to waffle on about, you know, kind of almost pseudo-psychological philosophy that they tried to embed in the practice, which it did feel like psychoanalysis that we were engaging in and not art practice. It was very maddening, and I've been working since then. It was only last year that I graduated, but I've been working since then to regain my ability to draw and paint, because I lost that for 3 years because of.
Why did you go to this school?
I went because my mentor / friend went there and she told me to go, and then her friend also went there and she told me to go. And when they went, it was different tutors, but they were still, they still had this, what I used to describe as a tube filled with slime that everyone would have to go down. It's not literal. I just mean everyone had to make a mess. And if you didn't make a mess, you weren't getting good marks. So if I showed them a portrait that I did that was trying to push my ability to render, they wouldn't react. When I showed them that I was filming my meals from above whilst eating them, they said, oh, that's good, that's interesting. And I said, yeah, but that's an in-between transition of a video that I could make. So I started to become an art film. You know, that was what I would submit was art films. And my final degree show submission was, I think it was 5.5 or 6.5 hours long. And it was just a repeated art film, but it was so long that I actually snuck in recordings of tutors saying things that was inappropriate into certain, because I thought they'll never watch the whole thing. So I'll be able to get away with putting in recordings of them saying inappropriate things, which I did, which is quite fun. There's that.
Okay. Yes. All right. Okay. Mr. Renshaw, what is beauty in your opinion?
Now, this is something which I think we may disagree slightly on this, which is interesting, I think. I'm someone who has a bit of a hippie outlook towards beauty. And although I can appreciate what you've said to me before about beauty and health, and I think there's a lot of truth in that, I'm also aware of kind of subjective lens and what I see as beautiful. Other people, for example, my friend, the one who I always call my mentor, she doesn't see much beauty in rusty tractors, and I do. I look at rusty tractors and I'm like, that is beautiful. I love that because I love the age of it. I love the use of it. I love that it's got so much texture because it's been used for so long. And I want to draw, parts of that tractor, and especially the farmer as well, because that's interesting to me. Whereas she wants to do the classic landscape. And she would often, when on walks together in the countryside, would say, what would you paint whilst we're here? And I would look towards the shadow and where there was dappled light, and I'd say, probably a close-up study there. And she said, but you have this landscape here. And she'd be trying to point at the classic view. And I'd say, you're not wrong, there is, but you're trying to get everything. And I'm trying to get everything in that square, so we're both trying to do the same thing in different, ways. And to a greater extent, there is, no, I don't, what I'm like with trying to not swear and trying to not be crude. This is obviously, mainly on my podcast, but I'm trying to have this as my wholesome arc in my life where I, but there's, if you'll forgive me, there's a chap called John McAfee. Are you familiar with John McAfee?
That sounds vaguely familiar, but I can't say that I know who you're talking about now.
If you owned a PC, you used to be plagued by McAfee antivirus protection.
Oh, okay. Then that's probably why it sounds familiar.
Yeah,
okay.
And he's a chap who was strange. I think it's fair to say strange. He would pay women to defecate in his mouth. And that's not something which I would accept outside of torture, basically, that would be. But that's something that he would actually pay for. Now, I know that's not necessarily beauty, but that's something that he really valued, which I would completely detest and probably look for any way out of. And so I see that as, if he can see that as beautiful, and I can see the shadow as beautiful, and my friend sees the classic landscape as beautiful, there's already a spectrum there that's fairly wide. I'm trying to get my collaborator in this current project I'm making appreciate slugs. And she really doesn't like slugs, but she finds everything else beautiful, almost everything else beautiful, but she doesn't like slugs. And I'm saying, they're incredible, they're gastropods, they've got incredible markings on them. If you don't think about touching or eating them, if all that can just go away, then you can look at these things as just really interesting life forms. And her response has been, but they're eating my lettuce. I said, they don't care about property. They don't look at territory and think, oh, that's hers, I can't go. That's not something which creatures do. It may sound outside of beauty that I'm talking about, but I'm trying to say that to encompass all of what, if you get far enough outside of the planet, everything looks beautiful. And if we were to look at, say, ants in a mound, you could see that as beautiful, even though they could be doing all kinds of horrendous things to each other. And I think it's the personal experience and the, I suppose it'd be the empathy that we have that removes things from being beautiful and becomes, that is completely disgusting and unacceptable. If we weren't who we are as humans, I don't think we would necessarily see a lack of beauty in anything. And I know that sounds a bit hippie, but I really do think that the spectrum for what beauty is so wide that we're just honed by nature, nurture, and any other development that occurs in our lifespan. That's my view anyway. It's why I try to not dismiss anyone's appreciation of beauty as much as I may say, that is tricky. That's challenging for me to accept surgery to that extent is beautiful, or, whatever else, certain things that can really challenge what you think is classic beauty. But I think it is a huge spectrum. So it's the other question that I knew you'd ask that I thought, if I'm being honest, it's a very long answer where I end up saying, I don't really know. I think maybe everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And I mean, I agree in the sense that there is some extent of personal experience, the nurture part basically of life that influences whatever one finds beautiful or attractive or pretty or sexy or whatever it is. But I also don't think that removes the foundation, which is the nature part. So I think so in my opinion, what we find beautiful, both as an individual and as part of a species, of which we all obviously belong, to which we obviously all belong. There are certain things that are absolutely cross-cultural, because I think symmetry can't be denied as part of what makes another individual either beautiful or attractive or whatever it is. Although I have mixed feelings about the part of the case of the guy, which is funny to me, kind of, that this guy that made the virus, the antivirus thing, likes being shat in his mouth. It's like, what? that's kind of funny. But
if that turns out being not true, then I apologize, but
no,
that's certainly what I've heard was happening.
I mean, he's not the only one. It's okay.
Yeah.
He's not the only one. Lots, I remember when Two Girls, One Cup came out.
Yeah.
And whatever. Anyway,
yeah.
The thing is that I'm not entirely sure that does, or not does justice. That's not right. But I'm not sure it's in the same camp as finding beauty in like death, or a gray day versus a sunny day, for example, because I think that's a fetish. And I'm not sure that fetishes are in that same sort of category where you can find some kind of beauty in, because similarly to what I was musing about earlier regarding art, it's kind of an ideal in a sense, and so is beauty. I mean, beauty according to Aristotle and Socrates and these guys, it's part of a triad that which is beautiful is also good, and it's also the truth. So it's like, it's an important, meaningful thing. So I'm not entirely sure whether fetishes fall into that category of that kind of meaningful thing. I think, I mean, as far as I understand, fetishes are kind of a matter of like sexual arousal and some other body part being too close together in the brain, and like that's why people like feet, for example, in like a fetish sort of way, that they can't have an orgasm unless feet are involved. So because in that case, if you end up, if a person likes having sex with little children, for example, then and you were to say like, oh, they must find something beautiful there, it's like, that doesn't sound right to me, or like having sex with animals, for example, and then that doesn't sound right to me as a relationship. So I think otherwise I'm inclined to kind of, I mean, I agree to a certain extent with what you're otherwise saying, because of what I was saying, that it's, of course, the nurture is what molds the individual as the individual grows, but then the underpinnings are nature. So there are markers, for example, of health, of fertility, of attraction, of beauty, that makes the sexes attracted to each other. And we don't necessarily have control over that. There might be like commonalities, like, for example, if you were to have a look at the women that you were attracted to, I mean, at the women that you've been attracted to throughout your life, there might be some kind of commonality between them, like, oh, maybe they all had black hair or something. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to be attracted to blonde women. Or women that maybe diverge a little bit from the commonalities that those previous women had. But then the people that you've been attracted to so far might have those standards of probably not going beyond a certain weight, or probably not going beyond a certain height, or having a certain, more or less a certain shape, this type of stuff. That,
can I ask, is this based on, to create kind of a normative model, you would say surely a majority, and then you'd have divergent fetishized areas. And if those numbers shifted and we became the minority where, let's say symmetry, to not go into anything really dark, but let's say it was just symmetrical faces were considered not beautiful all of a sudden. And the minority thought, well, there's a lot of beauty in symmetry. It's kind of asymmetrical faces aren't ugly necessarily, but they're not, they don't have that kind of, I'm trying to think of the word, the kind of unified, I don't know, kind of, anyway, the kind of quality which symmetry can have, where it's pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
If it were that, would that discount? I'm trying to think of how to make a thought experiment where, if there were only 3 people on the planet and 2 of them engaged in bestiality and 1 of them didn't, that would make the one who didn't the one we're relying upon to create this more moral and ethical normative approach, but they would be outnumbered by those who practice bestiality and may procreate with each other. And I don't know if that's an adopted trait. I've no idea how genetic or inherited that fetish is. But I'm just wondering whether those, don't get me wrong, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm just wondering how do we make things that we don't agree with, at what point do they become invalid? Or not invalid, but less, I suppose, less significant in the conversation about how we discuss beauty. Or if I were to cover what you've mentioned about health, which I agree with, but there are exceptions where I used to work with my dad at an upholstery shop, and for dinner we'd go to a coffee shop and sit outside and have a coffee, and I used to smoke back then. And I would see people in the town where I live are in all shapes and sizes, and most of them aren't symmetrical. And there are certain people who are quite big people. Mm-hmm. And I would say, I would love to draw that person, but I know that it's so much harder to convince someone who is weighty to be drawn, because they would be self-conscious, they'd be paranoid about why I'd take an interest in that. But that to me is potentially part of this idea of trying to gain knowledge of shapes and sizes and what happens to bodies and how you draw that from imagination, because I wouldn't be able to draw very accurately someone with a large amount of weight as well as someone who were in peak physical condition, because I've studied more athletic builds than I have, people who are especially large. So there is kind of a beauty there. And even the lack of health, even someone who can be on their deathbed can still have something where before death you can see that glimmer of appreciation, of contentment, of acceptance, and something beyond which the stress and anxiety of someone who is much younger or in much better health can express sometimes. I don't know if this is incoherent, but I suppose that's what I'm wrestling with a lot of, is it can be, you can find beauty in lots of things. And I wonder whether a 10-to-1 majority is what's dictating what beauty is, or whether it is something which shifts over time, just like larger bodied women to now specific, well, it was just very slim and now it's slim with curves. Whereas people who I interview from South America have said that they prefer larger women with curves, but not obese, but much larger than you're seeing in pop culture, or most of pop culture. So I think a lot of culture, kind of cultural kind of dictates can be considered in this metric, I suppose. I don't know. What are your thoughts around the kind of parameters there?
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. I think common does not mean normal. And that's applicable to just because 20 people, just because, say, for example, that 100 people and 70 of them are fucking their dog, doesn't mean that's normal.
No.
But, if you grew up knowing those people, then you probably will think it's normal, I guess. And that's the nurture part, But then, even if you grew up around those people, then you might still not want to fuck your dog, I guess.
Are we talking moral or are we talking beauty? Because beauty is so...
well, I mean, I'm thinking of somebody that, I guess it doesn't have to be bestiality necessarily, but for example, if a person grew up in a violent household, for example, which I think that might be easier to understand and muse about, just because I don't know, I feel like I heard more about that. That person is going to grow up thinking that's normal, and so the dynamics that they saw in their household of expressing love, of expressing fear, of vulnerability and relationships and all that stuff is going to be, it's like that's going to be their foundation. And so they're going to think that's normal, and they're not going to understand what a healthy relationship is. And so I don't know about that kind of, I don't know how it would work for a massive shift in which suddenly bestiality is just accepted as par for the course in the life of a person. It's like, yeah, I fucked my dog when I was a little kid, but I don't do that anymore. I don't feel like it. Like talking about how I had a sandwich a month ago, something like that. I don't know what it would take for that to happen, because I think it would have to happen over a very long period of time where the other things stop feeling normal and right or something. And that would take a long time, because I mean, it's like, it's different if one person grew up in a violent household where that's normal for that individual. But then if you have an entire population of an entire country, for example, where 70% of the people grew up and live in violent households where there's like domestic abuse is just, that's like the what they have every day, then that's different. Or more, 80%. It's just like par for the course. Everyone does it. It's normal. It's like if you're a woman and you get married, you're like, I'm going to get beat up every day, just like I did at home, or something like that, But I guess I still have some kind of an issue with kind of pairing that with the idea of being able to find beauty in, I guess, another category of arguably terrible things. And, I guess now that I got to this point of talking about it, I mean, Goya painted people getting executed, for example, like shot. I think so. That's that's a type of violence, and that's arguably not that different from any of the other examples that we talked about. So I guess you could argue that he found something worth recording there, and I don't know if it's necessarily a beautiful thing. I don't know as a viewer, I guess. I don't know if if the admiration or whatever would, in my case, would be found in what he is depicting, but how he depicted it. Because, for example, I really like Kath Kollwitz, and she was amazing, and she depicted people suffering and people in terrible situations, like starving children and a mother holding her child that just died.
It's all beautiful, but it's all grief. It's all grief.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's like these terrible situations that, I mean, I don't want to be holding a cradling a child, what child that I gave birth to that died. I don't want that in my life. However, and the admiration that I feel for the work is, I think, and like the pleasure that I derive from looking at that work is from the skill that she has in conveying the information. Because, for example, in the case of the mother holding the dead child, there's like the gesture and the physical language of the mother holding the child, because she's sitting on the floor like in an Indian, with her legs crossed, and the kid is kind of cradled on top of her, and the mother is kind of also with one of her legs also holding besides her arms, like also the kid, and she's like hunched over the kid. And so like that visual information with which the grief of the mother is being communicated, that takes a lot of skill to be able to do that accurately. Even if the drawing looks nothing like the subjects, if she was drawn from imagination, I don't know what the circumstances were. But the skill in being able to talk about that in the drawing, I think that's where I derive pleasure, because I obviously am not happy that the mother is having this terrible moment. And I don't like that those people were getting executed in Goya's painting. I don't think that's beautiful, So yeah, something like that.
No, I agree. I think it's really good, because that's a great example as well, is that I'd see Katie Colvert's work as absolutely beautiful because it's describing humanity. But the same with Goya, is it's a snapshot of something horrendous, but these are all people who were deceived into believing this is the action that's right. Now, I have made arguments. I don't know if I'm willing to do it on a podcast that's going to be viewed by a lot of people, but I have made arguments for huge transgressions, and not because I'm in favor of them, but people who do the most disgusting things are making those decisions. And we've never wrestled with this. We've never, we don't struggle with desires that some people have, that are some of the darkest, worst things you can do. And if we did, it would be a sickness, an illness. And I think if that were to be depicted in art, there's potential that we could see humanity in it, even if the act itself is completely immoral and shameful and disgusting. There's beauty in capturing that moment because it's humanity, and humanity is so complex. So I think beauty is such a complex concept to try and wrap your head around. And I agree, but if it were all flowers and rabbits, I think I'd be disappointed that we're not digging into the crevices of what humanity really is.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, but I think I agree with that. But I think if anything, that rather points to the complexity of what beauty is. And because I think that's another issue that we have, humans that we have, which is conflating beauty with the appearance of something. And I don't think, and I mean, that might be part of it in some cases, but I don't think that's kind of like the meat of what beauty is. Because beauty is a feeling, beauty is, among many other things, like I'm not acting like I know what it is, but I know, I mean, I'm just musing because I'm just mentioning that because of how I feel when I'm admiring and contemplating either a work of art or a flower, or like the button of a flower that's going to become a flower, a plant or a bug, or this type of stuff. Because I mean, that of course argues for the possibility that beauty can be found anywhere, but I don't think that necessarily points to beauty being anything necessarily, because I think the feeling that it elicits is the same, in the sense that whomever is gazing upon whatever it might be, like the feeling of having to stop and think about what you're looking at and wondering about why it has called your attention in this way, and why you can't stop thinking about it afterwards, or why you want to keep thinking about it afterwards. I think that is where the real value and the real meaning of it is. So it's something about that feeling that where the meaning or what beauty is lies. And I also think that it's very, very similar, if not the same, for everyone.
Yeah.
Because at least I greatly enjoy the unifying aspect of it, in the sense that, and art also, the unifying aspect in the sense that it unifies all humans, because all humans, all cultures, all tribes, whatever you want, have produced some form of art just right from the beginning for whatever reason, you know. And I think that's really important to know and to remember, because it is so in vogue to divide right now. Be like, oh, you can't speak to that because you don't have this one thing that I had growing up, or because you don't look this way that I look. And it's like, that is so fucking irrelevant. It's like, you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, you don't, it's like you're, I don't know. It's like, I just think that those unifying things are much more important than the things we think divide us. I mean, that's a little tangent there, but anyway.
No, I like it. I mean, I was curious as well. Have you discussed on your channel AI and AI art making and the use of it? Yeah. Is there a brief summary you can give? Because I'm curious, or should I just look up the video?
I can send you the video afterwards, but I don't really know how I feel about it. I feel more positive than negative about it in general. I don't like the doom people that are like, oh my god, it's gonna take over everyone's jobs, and it's soulless, and this really, really negative stuff. It seems really short-sighted and just negative for the sake of being negative. And I don't care for those arguments. So I'll send you the video, which really kind of discusses the arguments that I've heard that I like versus the ones that I don't. I'm not necessarily expressing my opinion, because I watched a bunch of videos and I was so angry at the negative ones. I was like, what a whiny, stupid piece of shit video this is. I was so annoyed. But anyway, okay. I'll send you those afterwards. Mr. Renshaw, we have long broken the hour-long mark of our conversation. So I'm going to start closing it out. Please tell our future listeners and viewers, what more of what you're working on lately, what projects you have coming up. Is there anything you're excited about that you have coming up? Anything you want to add? Where can your work be found?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I have recently joined Threads. That's something which I'm struggling to get traction on, because it's hard to be seen on there. I don't really know how that's going to pan out, but I'm trying to post every day, and I find that I write more on Threads than I do on Instagram. Instagram, it's usually, this is a charcoal and chalk piece, there's a video on YouTube. So I have an Instagram account, Simon Says _artwork, and it's the same on YouTube under the same name. I'm mainly trying to build up the YouTube channel. I do a lot of interviews, some tutorials, and a lot of entertainment art. I'm excited currently about, there's 3 exhibitions I'm part of this year.
Nice.
It's they're kind of stacking up potentially 4, but the main one is this collaborative project, which is called Movement in the Fields. And that is me and Peter Gletzer, who's a German artist. I met her in university and she escaped. I should have escaped because she was having a hard time there, and she went to a better school. And her and I have stayed friends and started working together. So that's going to be an exhibition that we do from, I believe it's the 9th of September until, I think it's the 7th or 8th of October. And that's in Carn in Carnarvon. So if anyone is willing to travel to Wales and come and see that in Carn in Carnarvon, then please do. And we are exhibiting our collaborative work in a pub, because that was her idea, and I thought that's a wonderful idea, because it's going to be local to the farmers who we've been befriending visiting their farms. And it's called the Eagle and Child, and that will be in November. We're not sure of the exact date, but the owner and manager there have been very accommodating and generous. And then the 3rd exhibition is actually October. I think it's 9th of October. And that is a plankton project with about 38 artists, I think it is. And I'm making 2D artwork, but I've also made a film because I'm working with the people who organized the project. And I've been collaborating with a couple of the artists there because they're such a nice group of people and it's really interesting. But I've been interviewing all the artists that I can. And I've made a couple of films to promote the exhibition, but I'm going to be making a film that will be exhibited there, not as artwork, but as part of the project. And the potential fourth is one which is going to be in the woods in Bethesda in North Wales. Oh, sorry, the Plankton project is in, oh no, I shouldn't have said that because I can't even remember where it is. I will, if I find out, I'll let you know just so that you can maybe put details in somewhere. I don't know, but that's what I've got going on pretty much, I think. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds really good. Nice work.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. All right. So, thank you everyone for watching and listening. Special thanks to my guest, Simon, for agreeing to talk to me and for his time. If you'd like to support Simon, my podcast, myself, or all three, all corresponding links will be in the caption. Make sure you like this video and leave a comment so we know you were here with us. Also, remember to subscribe to my audiovisual channel and see you next time. Thank you, everyone. Bye.